what I'm discovering is that the world of entrepreneurship is changing. I'll tell you, I'm 62 years young, and my goal is to do a flip off the diving board every year. That's my goal.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And so I grew up in the era that you work hard and you work harder and you get ahead. But there's younger entrepreneurs that, believe in the 4-hour work week. So it's hard to lump entrepreneurs. Yeah, it is. So it's hard to lump, the idea is as an entrepreneur that you can have it all. You can have freedom of time, you can have freedom of money, you can have freedom of love, and you can have freedom of impact. So that would be and it's interesting because this legacy planning that I help entrepreneurs with gives them those things.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I am so excited for this podcast interview. I think everyone, not only entrepreneurs, but I think everyone should listen to what this beautiful lady has to talk about. So she is a 4 times best-selling author, and she helps entrepreneurs keep their wealth. And who wouldn't want that, right? And learn the secrets for creating generational wealth. It's her goal to create a new industry to support entrepreneurs. And on top of all of that, she does stand-up comedy. So welcome to the show, Cindy Arledge. I'm so happy to have you here.
Oh, Kathy, it is such a pleasure to be here. And I just really appreciate being able to spend time with you. So thank you for the invite.
Oh, of course. Of course. I think there's so much to talk to you about that literally I could have you probably on 15 podcasts in a row and it wouldn't be enough. So, but let's go ahead and jump in. So tell me, because you and I had chatted before, I wanted to bring up something that we had discussed. You had something called the formula for living. So tell me about that.
Well, in 2005, my parents passed away 8 months apart to the day. And that was really the hardest time of my life. But even more painful than that was what happened to our family when my parents passed away. I had an unexpressed expectation as the baby of the family that my older brothers would always be there for me. Mm-hmm. And when, unfortunately fighting started and they weren't there, I went into what's called the dark night of the soul. And it's when, for me, I asked 3 questions. What am I supposed to learn from this? What am I supposed to do different? And what did I do to deserve this much pain? Mm. And what I discovered is that I didn't do anything to deserve the pain. It's just part of life. Pain is pretty much everyone's going to experience pain, but suffering is optional. And so to get myself out of that dark night of the soul, I started really studying the masters and what was I supposed to learn and what was I supposed to do differently? So I created this thing I call a formula for living. And it's funny because it's like misspelled. It's G.R.I.P.P, but it's spelled G.R.I.P.P. And so G.R.I.P. stands for being gratefully, responsibly, intentionally pursuing purpose. And when I started using that, my life turned around. I got out of the dark night of the soul, and it didn't matter what happened to me. I felt like I had the tools to handle anything. So much so that I decided that I was going to test my theory with one last test, and then bring this formula for living to help other people transform their lives. And the test that I ended up settling on was to walk 500 miles across Spain to complete the Camino de Santiago, which is an ancient pilgrimage in Europe.
Wow.
That all, if you're Catholic.
Did you say 500 miles?
I did. I
said
my gosh. 500 miles. And I had plantar fasciitis before I left.
Oh.
And my test was, can I walk 500 miles in a foreign country with plantar fasciitis with ease and grace using my formula for living? And that became my first book, My Camino, My Life.
Wow. That is something I did not know that. So I'm going to have to dig into that book. That's I mean, how long did it take you to do that? I'm just curious.
37 days. And
Oh,
what's
really?
interesting is 8 years ago today, I was out walking the Camino. I left on
Oh,
April the 15th, 8 years ago. And so every year around tax day, I'm like, oh, I was out there walking on the Camino. And my goal is to go back. It is such a life changing, amazing journey. Everybody that does the Camino wants to do it again.
wow. So what did you learn? What was like the biggest lesson that you learned?
Well, two parts of that. Okay. The first part, I'm going to tell the second part first. The second part was when I wrote my book. I witnessed my own healing from the trauma of losing my parents, the tragedy with my siblings, which by the way has improved 17 years later,
Good.
and the secrets that I discovered, what successful families do to transfer wealth, and that I ended up writing two more books that year. So I ended up publishing three books as a first time author. That was what I took, that as people needed to know this information. Forget
Hmm.
about the formula for living. Yes, it's important, but really help entrepreneurs keep the money that they've earned. So that's the second one. And the first one, the Camino is actually a short story for life. We are spiritual beings that are living on a physical plane called Earth School.
Hmm.
And since then, I've learned so much more. We are feeling creatures who can think. And so the Camino was a mini life with a start and a finish. And I learned how to trust my intuition. I learned how to show my authentic self because, girl, I was a hot mess. I'm a hot mess everywhere I go. And
I don't think so, but anyway.
well, you can ask the French woman that I accidentally almost got into bed with my first night out on the
Oh
trip,
gosh.
and she was not happy, and it was terrible, and so I write about that. Yeah, so it was a great journey.
Wow. So, as for an entrepreneur, it sounds like you learned so much about that. And one of the things was helping entrepreneur, keeping the wealth. What is something simple, or what are some simple steps that we as entrepreneurs, because we all work so hard, right? And we do it because we love what we do, but at the same time, obviously, it has to be a win-win. We're helping people, but at the same time, you have to get something out of it. You need to make some sort of living out of it. So how can we hang on to our money?
Well, you may have to have me on 15 times, right?
That's what I was going to
Because
say. There's so much to talk about.
well, there is, and what I'm discovering is that the world of entrepreneurship is changing. From I'll tell you, I'm 62 years young, and my goal is to do a flip off the diving board every year. That's my
Oh,
goal.
yes.
Yeah. And so I grew up in the era that you work hard and you work harder and you get ahead. But there's younger entrepreneurs that, believe in the 4 hour work week. So it's
Hmm.
hard to lump
That's the new thing.
entrepreneurs. Yeah,
Hmm.
it is. So it's hard to lump, the idea is as an entrepreneur that you can have it all. You can have freedom of time, you can have freedom of money, you can have freedom of love, and you can have freedom of impact. So that
Hmm.
would be and it's interesting because this legacy planning that I help entrepreneurs with gives them those things.
Okay. And it gives them those things. Like, is it a stepwise process? Is it a long process? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I meet entrepreneurs where they are.
Okay.
And so it is a step-by-step process. I definitely have, it's like the Camino. So in
Okay.
Europe, you can walk out of any country in Europe and end up getting on a Camino and ending up in Santiago. So I know where the destination is. How we get there is totally customizable to every client that I work with.
Okay.
And the interesting thing about it, but there's some things that we can do to really get you jump started, right? And what I like to do is, remember in the old westerns where they circled the wagons to protect,
Right.
the pioneers.
Hmm.
I like to start with entrepreneurs, and if you don't mind, I'm going to lead this into a conversation you and I had. Let's circle the wagons and let's get everything protected. And then that brings up the gnarly topic of let's talk about aging, death, and money. And that's where I practice my stand-up comedy because, I can clear a room like that. That's not the place where people want to start. But it's the most impactful because when you start with the end in mind and you protect, you do that protection piece, well, then from there you can really up level to add in those more enjoyable pieces.
Okay. Okay. So what do you see? Like, what's the biggest mistake that entrepreneurs make?
Well, entrepreneurs are risk takers. I mean,
Right.
we're
For
bred,
sure.
yeah, we're bred, right, to be risk takers. We enjoy it. We love the thrill, right? And so
It's like a roller coaster.
it is, and just so you know, because I've been doing this for so long now, I used to take like 2.5 days to get started, and we do a weekend retreat, and we get to know each other, and I can do that in 6 hours now because time is the most precious gift that we have. And it's still effective, but we just really get down to it and I make it fun. If it's not fun, I'm not going to do it.
Right. And
And
why
so
do
what,
it ever if
yeah,
it's not fun?
yeah, exactly. So the first thing we need to know is, do you have a will? Do you have an estate plan? And most of the time that answer is no, because entrepreneurs are risk takers, right? And then the second piece, and this has been so fascinating, especially when I work with second generation entrepreneurs like myself, they've inherited a business or they've inherited assets and they've been tasked with taking care of them. And yet they can't even lay their hands on the most basic of paperwork, the LLC paperwork. So just even getting, documents organized into a place where other people can find them. And it goes back to that being prepared.
Okay.
So just basic pieces like that, like where's your LLC paperwork? And one of the most fascinating things about entrepreneurs is we wear more than one hat. Because of the legal structures that we live in, we don't mind having an LLC, a limited partnership. We've got our personal, we've got our C corporations, S corporations. And because we've been doing this for so long, we automatically switch the hat when we sign the paper. I'm the general manager here. I'm the president here. I'm the trustee here. But the rest of our family, the ones that we're leaving it with, have no idea how many hats we wear. So one of the basic things I help entrepreneurs with is create an enterprise plan. Like these are the different hats, these are the different owners, and leave your family some breadcrumbs.
I was going to say, so how do you suggest going about doing like a succession plan, whether it's for your family or even just selling the business?
Well, and honestly, that's kind of a later on. There's so much more that needs to be done. And that's why we do the protection piece. Like, do you have your will? If something were to happen to you, is your family protected? 9 times out of 10, that answer is no. And then we do this, gathering your documents, getting everything organized. I worked with a family out in California that had inherited apartment buildings that her family had bought 35 years ago. And she was tasked with being the trustee, but they couldn't even find the paperwork. So how can you possibly be an effective executor or trustee when you don't even know what the operating agreement is that you're supposed to be running by? So we had to recreate legal documents from 4 decades ago. So just this piece of getting your legal piece. And then what we do is we actually host a first family meeting. So I know the succession planning is important and the selling of the business, but to get the family on the same page first, the succession planning is just too big to tackle at the beginning, Kathy. Okay. You got to do bite-sized wins and celebrations first.
Okay. I guess, how do you bring to the forefront that, almost like you don't know what you don't know, and making, even just bringing that up, so that you can, I guess I know so many of us out there, and my listeners as well, we may think we have everything in place. And I know you and I had a conversation a few weeks back, and just a real simple conversation. It had something to do because I have 3 boys, and My youngest one just turned 18, and you brought something up about that again, I thought I had my act together when it came to all of that. And you brought to my attention about, in that particular case, it was, if something happens to your kids, once they turn 18, you don't have any right to say what happened, any medical decisions. And that just blew me away. Something so simple that, especially with my background, because so much of my sales experience all has to do with in healthcare. I mean, I know healthcare inside and out, and I hadn't even thought about that. That just blew me away. So, how do we get past not knowing what we don't know? Is there, I mean, I guess that's the $1 million question, right?
Well, the first piece of this is that for people to be growth minded. When you think you know everything, it's like, I'm from Texas, so you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink.
Right.
And so typically a fixed minded entrepreneur is not anybody that wants to work with me because they think they know everything.
Okay. Interesting.
So it's a growth minded, hey, I never thought of life that way. Maybe, maybe there's some things that I can do. The other piece of that is I've written 4 books, Kathy. I mean, for $20, you can go on Amazon and buy a book. And, I write very simple language because why use a $5 word when a nickel word would do? Let's make this thing understandable, right? So that, and so to your point of when you know that there's something that you want to accomplish, let's just say you want to, sorry about this. So here's the thing. I've never met an entrepreneur yet that didn't want to make his life better for his family.
Right. I mean, it's all about the legacy.
Yeah.
I mean, of course we want a better life for ourselves, but don't we ultimately, not only do we want a better life for our customers, but we want a better life for our family. We want to leave them a legacy of something. Either they can work in the business or they have some sort of generational wealth, that they can use to do good in the world.
Yes. And one of the challenges we have is that our brains are naturally biased to think we have time to plan for that later. There's an excellent book called The Ostrich Paradox that talks about governments and why they don't take preventative actions. And they did a wonderful story in there about the tsunami and early warning tsunami horns and why the government never invested in those. And the same biases are true for us as human beings. We have a natural bias to want to take care of something immediate. And as entrepreneurs, don't we have the squirrel factor? I mean, and so,
right.
And so something long-term, like, wait, I'm going to die,
we're all going to die.
Well, but there's a lot of entrepreneurs, the entrepreneur's like, well, maybe I can figure out a cure, And
isn't so that the saying though, that there's the 2 sure things, paying taxes and that you're going to pass away.
And I will tell you that wealthy families have figured out how to not pay taxes.
So that's a secret I would like to know about. I'm sure everybody would like to know about too.
There is. And wealthy people don't, here's the thing about taxes, Kathy. We have a natural right to pay as little as possible. It's in the tax code. If there is a deduction that you're eligible for, then you get the right to use that. The challenge is that the super wealthy have a whole team of people to help them figure out that tax code. And that's one of the things that I am excited about, bringing that level of thinking to entrepreneurs, because if it's what goes back to what you said earlier. We don't know what we don't know. And if we knew that there was a way to avoid taxes, then we would all do it. And so I agree with you, except that there's only one sure thing, and that's death. I'm down to one. I'm down to one.
That's great. Then I'm going to need to spend some serious time with you. So is that the reason why you put together your goal of creating like a new industry to support entrepreneurs?
Yes. And, COVID has shown us what happens when we have a nation of weak economic families. For me, the family is the smallest economic unit of society. And so if we can create strong economic units, then we create a strong community. And when we create a strong community, we create a strong nation. And when enough nations do this, and this sounds kooky, but we would have world peace
Oh,
because
no,
there
I
wouldn't
agree
be
because
people.
absolutely that is what I think so much of the infighting is all about is boils down to finances, resources, right? Is there oil in certain places? Is there whatever? I mean, I could go off into a tangent with that, so I won't. But no, I totally agree with you.
And I was very much impacted, when I was going through that dark night of the soul.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of people that don't understand when you're expecting a inheritance, it can take years to settle the estate. So we go into this like waiting period where you're going to receive wealth, but it may be years away. And for me, I would have given all of that back to have my parents.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
There's an idea called the bread of shame. I studied Kabbalah. One of the things I studied going through this was Kabbalah. And there's a concept that when you receive wealth that you haven't earned, it has a spiritual connotation of bread of shame. And it happens to lottery winners. And it happens during this inheritance process that you receive wealth that you didn't earn. And so you feel clunky about it.
Oh, wow. I'd never thought about that.
And, when I write my books, I'm like, somebody you loved had to die for you to get it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it even has like that negative concept. So when I was studying, I was in this 2-year waiting period and, I'm in this dark night of the soul. I started like, well, wait, there's gotta be a better way. And I didn't know what I didn't know. And there was a poem. It's on a crypt from like the 1700s in England. And the gist of the poem is this guy was at the end of his life and he really had wanted to change the world, but he couldn't even change his family. And he realized that if he had only changed himself first, then he could have changed his family. Then his family could have affected his country and his country could have impacted the world.
Wow.
And so it's a family level, personal family level to change the world. So I've got, for myself, I taught change myself, change my family, change the world.
I love that. I really, really love that. I mean, one of the things I've always wanted to do from being a young child is I always thought I would make a big difference in the world. But it's interesting. I've never thought of it the way that you just said that with that quote.
And that's my goal, is to help other families realize that. And I'll tell you one of the things that I do with my daughters. My daughters are almost 40. And let me just tell you, that is like
really?
a whole, oh yeah.
Oh my gosh. For all you viewers, I know you can't see unless you're on YouTube. This lady is gorgeous. And she's got the most perfect skin. So I digress.
Well, thank you. It's really strange to have daughters that are almost 40. It's like, wow, how did that happen?
Right.
But one of the things that I do is that I write them a letter every month. And I share a little bit of wisdom every month. And it's so fascinating for me because life happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I take an event that's happened within our family, and then I'm sharing that formula for living and the things that I'm learning so that it goes through them and impacts my grandkids.
Wow, that is like such a gift. Like really such a gift.
And also we capture those and we have a legacy book. So later on, it allows future generations to read, what was happening back in 2020, what was happening, how did they go through the pandemic, what were they thinking? It's there month by month by month.
Wow. I love that. If that's not something that you have out there already, you need to put that out there.
There's so much, and it can be fun and easy. When I practice my stand-up comedy routine, I'm like, I'm the last person that you think is a criminal, but I am.
What?
because
It's funny because I
I,
was going to ask you about your stand up because I'm like, how
yeah,
did you get there? That's the left brain, right brain thing that's going on. You and I have that in common. So,
yeah, I have a diabolical way of getting grandkids. If you invite your adult children to an exotic beach vacation every year, they celebrate before they go, they get pregnant, and you never have to deliver on the vacation. You just keep rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. But we really do. We do host an annual trip for our family every year to a different location. And I do take credit for 4 of my 5 grandkids
oh my
because
goodness.
of the vacations. And then when my husband and I moved back to the area to be closer to the kids, I host a cousins night. And so now this is where the criminal aspect comes in. I've been pimping my daughters out to their husbands once a month so that they can have a date night together. And then I get more grandkids.
Oh my goodness.
And I use
Diabolical.
that, it's diabolical. And I use that time with the grandkids to start, this is a good word, brainwashing them,
Okay.
change myself, change my family, change the world. Give them the tools, give them the formula for living. And here's the most interesting thing about this idea of retaining wealth. As a wealth creator, the entrepreneur, you either make the decision yourself or you're laying in bed with your spouse, your partner, and you're like, well, let's do this. And you decide. There's no committee. There's no, you just do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you leave it to the next generation, let's just say you have 4 kids like we do, you've actually created a partnership. But have you trained your children how to be partners? Have you trained your children how to make decisions about how to manage wealth and how to grow wealth and how to be stewards of wealth? And the reason that less than 10% of families are able to retain wealth past that 3rd generation, because at the 3rd level, the cousin consortium, children who've been raised in different households that don't have the same background as the partners now are expected to come together and again continue. How do we manage wealth? How do we steward wealth? How do we make these decisions around wealth when they weren't even raised together? So the idea of the cousin night every month is to start training them, and they're from 3 and 11 years old.
Wow.
But I am already intentional in teaching my cousin consortium how to be a team.
Wow.
That's the biggest secret right there.
Wow. That's really amazing. I have to say.